practicing pharmacy for over 40 years on the South Hill of Spokane. When I got Parkinson's disease, I couldn't believe that there was no easy access, no place you could go to learn something about the disease and get things rolling in your favor. And after 50 years in the drug business, you can't say that anymore, can you? 50 years in the pharmaceuticals business, it was just natural that I thought I would fill right in. So my wife and I put up the money to start the PRC, the Parkinson's Resource Center of Spokane. And like I say, it's over a dozen years ago now. And we have a mailing list of about 1,000 people. And we're doing a lot in the way of trying to match up somebody in this side of the state. We have a problem in that our number one neurologist moved out, just kind of poof, and he was gone, Dr. Santiago, and all the other neurologists in town are kind of trying to pick up the void. And it's been an interesting experience because some people don't like the new doctor, some people really like the new doctor, and a lot of bouncing around going on. And there's not much we can do about that. Now our hospitals are even, as you well know if you read the paper, they're arguing with each other who's going to get this service and who's going to get that service. So it's all going to affect all of us with Parkinson's and every other disease, because all these diseases, in a town like Spokane, you want a little business tip if you're going to go into business. You want to go into business somewhere where you can be profitable, and also where you can generate enough service for yourself that you become in demand. And my motto, when he asked me, well, what do you think about locating here, locating there? I say, well, let's just look at Spokane. Everybody thinks of Spokane as a small Seattle. It is not a small Seattle. It is a large Richville. Very significant. Because all of us have those family ties and those religious ties and all those ties together, and they get along and they move together. You bring in an outsider and they get isolated real quick. They know how to handle that. So, well, anybody have any questions? First,
Ed, would you mind sharing with the class how you first felt after your initial diagnosis and
yeah,
kind of the conversation you had with Jackie, your wife?
Yeah, I had noticed that I had one foot that was twitching. Just I didn't know what this tremor thing was at that time. And so we went down and thought we'd better get it checked out. My wife and I went down and got a diagnosis, and sure enough, he came back and he said, I think you have Parkinson's, but you're going to have to come back in 6 months, and then I can tell you for sure, because I have to get these measurements, and then we'll compare and see if you're going up or down or what way you're going. And of course, that's not the kind of diagnosis that you go skipping home and telling everybody in the world. You just came to the doctor and you have good news for them. But the wherewithal that we get to fight this disease comes from your heart, and it comes from you and your wife and your friends and your neighbors. I'll try and share something that happened last year at this very thing I was with you guys last year. Well, I'll share that right now with you. We were at this meeting. Here where the 4 empty chairs are up here. They had the speakers up here isolated kind of by themselves, and they gave us all some papers to work with and some glasses of water. So up there, and all of us are shaking like they do in the movies, you know. And they have a real what am I trying to think of? That's the other thing about Parkinson's disease. You have a one-track mind, literally. Your crossover doesn't work as good. When you get working on a project and you're concentrating on doing that one project, you don't hear the noise and stuff of what's going on near to you. You get on a focus and you stay on that focus. But anyway, as we're pulling into the driveway after this diagnosis, and we're asking each other the same questions, why me kind of questions, you know, why did I get it? Why didn't somebody else get it? And so as we're pulling in the door, pushed the garage door, and the garage door started going up, and all of a sudden I just stopped the car and I said, I know why God gave Ed Ewell Parkinson's disease. He gave Ed Ewell Parkinson's disease because he knew he'd do something about it. And sure enough, we started this foundation, and I don't know how long it'll run. Maybe it'll run another week, maybe another 10 years. I don't know. But as long as there are people out there, like you guys are in an excellent, excellent position right now. There's lots of new drugs coming. Our population is getting older. The generation of lots of things of older people are getting very obvious, and it's going to, you're going to come into a time. Every 5 years, they claim the population base of movement disorder diseases, that's MS, Lou Gehrig's, all those kind of, Alzheimer's, those kind of diseases that degenerate, is going to double every 5 years. So let's just say right now, if it was just 2%, in 5 years it would be 4. In 5 more years it would be 8, and so on. So you can see how fast it would gain in strength and whatnot. And you people are going to be right on the firing line. I'll be asking you all these questions. Does such and such a herb help if you take it? And I've not found any of them that work any better than, of course, everybody knows that you levodopa is by far the preferred drug nowadays. And did anybody have any questions?
Anything for Ed right now?
Does anyone in your family have that Parkinson's?
Yeah, my dad had Parkinson's. And there's a definite generic hookup in there somewhere too. Yes?
How many drugs are you on right now?
How many different drugs for the Parkinson's? About 5. And some of those are just different strengths of levodopa.
Oh, they all be the drug.
Yeah, they're all kind of the same thing. Agonist or something like that. They all work on the same kind of idea when you get down to it. I'm sure you guys all know that from being studying. So. Anyway, with that, I think I'll leave you.
Ed, one more quick question.
Okay.
When did you notice your foot twitch? The first sign of Parkinson's? What year was that?
Oh, I think about 1998.
Thank you very much, Ed.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Richard, you're up. Thanks, Ed. Sure appreciate your
I'm
time.
going to take off and go a little early for you guys.
He's a busy man. He's got a lot going on. So thanks again for your time, Ed.
Bye-bye.
Richard, what can I?
I'm going to have to experiment here. I don't know, maybe one will be enough. Let's see. Is that going to work?
Yep.
Okay. Where's my switch? Oh. Okay. Could you stand up here a minute while I
Yes.
jiggle the camera?
Richard's high maintenance.
He really wants pictures of me.
Okay, well, let me see if I can wing it then.
Okay. I'll Facebook all of you.
Okay, you got me in the picture?
Yes, I do.
Okay, yeah, well, thank you for inviting me here, Steve. I want to clear one thing up, is that I'm not a stand-up comic, but I do play one on TV. If you have Comcast cable and you go home tonight at 6 o'clock and turn on channel 14, you'll see a half hour of me explaining Parkinson's. And anyway, this was 5 or 6 years ago, and so you can see how I've progressed or deteriorated if you care to. And anyway, that's my introduction. Steve asked me to
talk about Parkinson's in my life, and I didn't know exactly where to start because I didn't know exactly when I got the Parkinson's. So I thought I would tell you the story of my life as well as telling you about Parkinson's, and I have it all written on the other side of this cardboard.
He did his homework.
Yeah. Okay, now, when I went to school, they taught history, but there wasn't much of it then, and I don't think the timeline had been invented, but it was all narrative. But this is a timeline, and it would stretch from there to way over there, so I compressed it on the board here. These are in decades, the 1930s, the 1940s, and I was born here in 1933, which adds up to 77 years, and if I were to live as long as my father did at age 84, we would be up about here. Oh, this is today's date, somewhere over here. And if I were to live as long as my mother, who died at about 90, I would get into this decade. And I have an ex-mother-in-law in Coeur d'Alene who's 100 years old, and I doubt that I'll break her record. But I left myself enough room so I could go away. Okay, well anyway, I told you I was born here in 1933, and that adds up to 77 years ago. And shortly after I was born, I had some elective surgery, and I don't recall being asked for permission. Anyway, it taught me something very important. That, to this day, I do not trust doctors or nurses or my parents. I grew up on, well, in my early years I was on a remote farm, and I just had my little brother to play with, and perhaps I didn't develop my social skills there because I had nobody to interact with except some animals. And I started school in Colbert, Washington. You may know where that is, and the town wasn't very big, and the class size wasn't very big. I'm not sure if I was in the top half or the bottom half of the first grade class because there were only 2 people in the class. I'm trying to concentrate this talk on slowness. That's one of the first markers of Parkinson's, is that people tend to be slow and deliberate and not very quick. The earliest thing I can remember was about grade 4. I think I was in the Valley school system at that time. And I remember we had a picnic at the end of school, and we had a foot race, maybe 50 yards or so. And somehow I was the fastest kid in the race, which is hard to believe, but anyway, that's one data point that says I was not slow. If I would jump up here to grade 11, I went out for track, and I shouldn't have, but every race I came in last, so maybe that's where my slowness started in grade 11. I'm trying to make some sense of my life, and it's hard to do. This was during the war years, World War II, and I was living in apple country at the time, and they shut the school down so that the kids and the teachers could harvest apples. And some people think that the pesticides used on apples are bad, and I doubt that picking those apples caused me any harm, but that's one factor we could look at. And let's see, I can't figure out my writings here. Oh, yeah, another thing during the war years, I spent a couple summers on a lookout tower with my mother and my brother, and we didn't have electricity on top of the mountain, but we did have running water if we would run down a half a mile and get it. And we had a pack sack that would hold water, and we went to a spring, and this spring was shared by a herd of wild horses and whatever deer or antelope played up there. And I doubt that the water was ever tested, and the fact that the horses walked in it, I don't know that that affected my health. Probably not, because the human body is resilient. Anyway, I'm casting about for clues as to why am I the way I am, and short answer, I don't know, but here I am. When I was in high school, I had my foot crushed in some machinery, and perhaps that had something to do with my slowness. I don't think so. I felt bad because the kids would laugh at my big feet, and that was an issue with me in high school. But if I go out here to the present date where I have a fear of falling, perhaps big feet are an asset. Also, we moved around a good bit. I lived a part of the war years in the Hanford-Pasco area. I don't know whether I'm a downwinder or an upwinder, and I haven't tried to find out, but you can put that in the data bank whether that had anything to do with my present condition. This was in high school. I got a job in an apple orchard in the summertime, and I worked for a little while, and they fired me because I was too slow and I took too many water breaks. The schools I went to were in small towns, and the class size was small, and they weren't much on math and science, but I did get to take a semester of typing, and these things up here tend to influence some things down here. For instance, in the typing class, I went into the National Guard. I lied about my age in high school, and the Guard was kind of like Boy Scouts with beer. But anyway, I could type 40 words a minute, so they put me in the office, and then I got called up during the Korean War to active duty, and again I was working in the office, and I wasn't sleeping out in the rain, and in fact I only made it as far as Colorado Springs, whereas most of the guys went to Korea or Germany, but that one typing course perhaps saved my life, I don't know. Oh, where am I? Well, I graduated from Coeur d'Alene High School in 1950, and at age 17 I lost something. It doesn't say what it was, so it's probably not important. Then a little later I foolishly got married, one of several foolish marriages. And then I was called into the Army, and I told you about that. And I had started the junior college in Coeur d'Alene, and so I went back there and to Moscow. In 1957 I got a degree in chemical engineering, and I went to work for Alcoa over in Wenatchee. And chemical engineering and companies have a lot of nasty stuff they deal with, and I don't know that these chemicals had anything to do with my Parkinson's today. Oh, by the way, I don't have much of a tremor compared to some others. About 2/3 of the Parkinson people do. But anyway, I was exposed to these chemicals from my work, and on the weekends I would go back to apple picking, but it must be a disorder there somewhere. But again, I think the exposure was trivial compared to a guy in a rain suit spraying those pesticides on the fruit. But anyway, that's a factor. This decade here, I had adopted 4 children, and Alcoa transferred me to Tennessee and Pennsylvania, which kept me in contact with these chemicals, particularly coal tar pitch and some chlorine and some other things you'd rather not breathe. Excuse me. Let's see, where am I here? Oh, after 20 years, my wife divorced me, and a year or so later we got back together, and we remarried each other, which wasn't a smart thing. This was the decade of my, oh, wait a minute. Well, I guess you call it midlife crisis, and I drank more alcohol than I do now, and I rode a motorcycle on long trips. If I had a company trip of 500 miles, I would try to get on my motorcycle and go that way. My boss didn't like it much, and it probably didn't help my pay grade, but anyway, I was an avid motorcyclist. And if you want to get on Google and ask about the Coeur d'Alene High School reunion, you might come upon my website, which promotes the reunion and also has some stories that I wrote for the motorcycle magazine and some things. Okay, here's 1980, getting old now, divorce and marriage, another good divorce and a bad marriage. And one summer I spent in Indiana at an Alcoa plant, and I got more exposure to chemicals, but I don't really blame the chemical companies, and I don't know who to blame, but anyway, I do have Parkinson's. My relatives don't have it, so who knows why. I started taking Synthroid about that time, perhaps for slowness. I don't know why they give it out, but a lot of people take it. Let's see, where are we now? Well, here's 1990, and some of the guys at work were making fun of my slowness, although I thought I did pretty well. I wrote a lot of reports, and I had some patents and publications and things that researchers are supposed to do. But we got a new CEO, and he counted 1,200 people at the laboratory, and he said, well, that's about twice as many, and so he let 600 of us go, and another 600, I guess, are still working there. But this is kind of key in here because the guys were laughing at my slowness, and I tended to stoop when I walked, and one guy gave me a catalog to buy a back brace so I would stand up like a soldier, and I don't know how I'm going to do this, but this, I'm okay.
You want me to hold that?
No. False alarm. This hand works fairly well. I can hold coffee cup and so forth. This hand is all bent out of shape. It's kind of grotesque. It's not arthritis, and it turned out they blame it on Parkinson's. I don't know why, but I guess that's the way it is. But we've got a little cluster here of my slowness, the stoop, the hand, and also I was developing symptoms of ED. And a lot of people don't like to talk about that. They kind of whisper, and they say, I think Richard has ED. But anyway, I'll come out and say it. I had ED, and you can call it what you want to. I'll get back to that later. It kind of well, anyway, I was laid off from my work, and I didn't find new work. I did a lot of volunteer stuff, like on the computer particularly. And I spent some time in Spokane with my mother, who was feeling poorly. I was living in Pennsylvania, and I made some trips back and forth. She was in intensive care for a time, and I came out here with a black suit, but she lived a couple more years, so it wasn't as bad as I thought. And About that time, for obscure reasons, I bought a house in Texas, and I rented 3 large moving vans. They're drive-it-yourself Penskes, and they're about 27 feet long, which is about half the size of a commercial 18-wheeler. This was not an 18-wheeler, but anyway, I would load up the truck in Pennsylvania. I'd drive it 1,700 miles to Texas and unload the truck, sometimes with help. Then I'd get on a Greyhound bus back to Pennsylvania and start it over again. I made 3 trips like that, so I had quite a bit of strength and vitality. At that time, I was approaching 60 years of age, and I went to a new doctor out here in Spokane, Dr. Kirkering. He's internal medicine, and the first time he saw me, he said, "You may have Parkinson's," and of course I scoffed at the idea. He said, "Well, we'll see." And it's typical for people about 67 years old to start having Parkinson's, so I wasn't too far off there. This hand kind of bothered me, and Dr. Kirkering sent me to a bunch of doctors, and none of them could figure it out. And I'd made a cross-country trip, and I stayed in Chicago for a time, and went to Loyola to some different doctors, and they couldn't figure it out. Literally, it took doctor number 13, a rheumatologist, to come up and say, "Well, this is Parkinson's." So at that time, I started seeing Dr. Greeley, and he put me on an experimental medicine that didn't seem to do me much good. So after a few months of that, I went to the Cinemet. And I did a lot of exercise. I don't do so much of that now. I don't know why, whether my condition has deteriorated and I don't have the strength to do it, or if I'm just lazy and that's why I'm deteriorating. I don't know. I got to do my New Year's resolution and start exercising more. Let's see. I took a bus trip across the U.S. Yeah, well, back here I was talking about my affliction with Ed, and up here I had a little run-in with a pharmacist, and I told this story a couple of years ago, so I won't tell it now, but in effect I accused this pharmacist of jeopardizing my life by not telling me how to use a glycerin suppository, but so I won't tell the story today. If somebody wants to take me out to lunch, I'll tell them this story. But if I tell you the story, you may not want to eat lunch. So anyway, people have an aversion to talking about some of these intimate things, and if you end up working in a retail pharmacy, you see there's a barrier back here to keep anybody from overhearing, but still the pharmacist has to hear what these people, maybe 1 or 2 generations older, have to say, and some of it may be a little embarrassing. And when you start having children and they're asking questions and finding things in your bedroom, you may have to deal with that, so I wish you well. I've made a couple of medical discoveries on my own, I think. One I labeled CCC here, and it says that the coughing cures constipation. And I discovered quite by accident that if I were sitting on the toilet with not much effect, that if I started coughing, something might happen. And I pass this on to the medical profession, but I've not seen it in print, although I don't read. My internist thought it was okay, but his nurse practitioner didn't like the idea, so take it for what it's worth. And Another thing, I think I've found a way to alleviate restless leg syndrome, which I have at times, and I think it can be treated topically with KY jelly. But again, I've reported that, and I've not seen anybody pick up on it. But those are some of my ideas. Like I said, I was a researcher once, so I like to think I'm an inventor, even though I'm not a accredited medic. Let's see, where are we going here? Towards the end. So, yeah, a year or so ago, a good friend of mine in the research lab died, and he died of Parkinson's, and I don't know why he got Parkinson's, whether there's any commonality with working in labs, but they're talking 1,200 people, and just a handful I know have died of Parkinson's. You can say about Parkinson's, well, it's not as bad as having heart disease, but I have a stent in my heart, actually an artery, and you can say, well, Parkinson's isn't as bad as cancer, but I've had cancer surgery on my big nose, and it took them a couple times to dig it out, and I guess it's not too dangerous, but I have had some other things, and just because you have Parkinson's doesn't mean you're immune to other serious things. Okay, now we're getting up close to where we are, and I'll have to see where we are. My eyes are going bad too. Yeah, well, I say I'm doing less exercise, and maybe I'm lazy, and I have some fear of falling, and it's not funny to see a grown man fall like a tree, and I have done that a time or two, and I'm trying to keep from doing it more. But I'll get back on my exercising when I get my ambition back. So anyway, I'm over here, and I might have another 7 years left if I live like my father, and more if I live like my mother. And I don't want to live like my mother-in-law, but there she is at age 100. So anyway, I guess that's about all I have to say. I'm filming these things, and if you watch Channel 14 on Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 6 o'clock, you might see people like Dr. Steve and Dr. Lindy and some other people on that program. And I'm doing some freelance stuff too for Channel 14, and particularly bluegrass music, and I've got one coming out on living in wheelchairs, so I'm keeping a little busier than I should, but I'm not exercising like I should. But anyway, that's my story, and I swear I'm not a stand-up comedian. Yeah, you may have. You may want to archive that.
Hi. Good to be here. I go around and speak quite a bit, and I'm actually with the mission organization. I've been with them about 20 years. I'm on loan to the places I'm working here, but I go to these churches and places to speak, and they've followed me for 20 years now. I've been with them. And they all want to know, how's Ruth doing, and all these problems she has wrong with her body. So I've taken to doing a little soft shoe at the beginning across the stage at church. And so you could imagine that with a bunch of Baptist churches, that doesn't go over well, but they are excited. I'm Ruth Polnick, and 11 years ago, I noticed I had a little tremor. But I've had type 1 diabetes, I'm in my 39th year. And taken insulin all that time. And so a friend of mine had diabetes and had a tremor, and he's called it a benign essential tremor. So I watched that for a while and had a really sharp endocrinologist. And after a couple years of this, he said, I think you should go see a neurologist. And I thought that was kind of overkill because my friend just took a beta blocker and took care of his tremor. And I said, well, can't you just prescribe me a beta blocker for my benign essential tremor? I was an RN for 25 years, so I diagnosed myself. And so he said, no, did a couple things with my hands and arms, and now I know, of course, now what he was doing. But he sent me to this neurologist, and I was 45 at the time. And so the guy said, did a few things. He says, I'm going to bring my partner in. That was still back then considered young to have Parkinson's. And so his partner came in, who I learned since is a real jerk. And he did a couple things, and he stood there and he goes, yeah, she has Parkinson's. And he turned around and walked out. And it had never crossed my mind. I mean, you'd think as an RN I would know these things, but it never occurred to me, because all I knew of people with Parkinson's were people sitting in wheelchairs, blinking and drooling, and they were all old. And I did know a little bit more, because in psychiatric nursing, back in the 70s, we were starting all those psychotropic drugs, and I was, we were nursing students at the VA hospital, and all these Vietnam vets were coming back, and we didn't learn anything. We didn't help them at all. All we did was play cribbage. And, but I could see, we knew that Parkinson's shuffle from all those drugs, and we saw that flat affect. And so that was totally my exposure to Parkinson's. And so I went straight to Barnes & Noble from the doctor's office and bought, that is still, I think, one of the best books about it. And I bought everything. And they sent me to the Muhammad Ali Center, which is in Phoenix. And I got a lot of information, but didn't really feel a little better about it until I went to a young onset Parkinson's support group, which was in some ways depressing, because everybody was on disability except one guy. And I remember thinking, this is the one guy that I'm going to be like, because he was a professor at ASU, and he rode his bike to work, and he was just determined that he believed exercise was what was going to help him. And so he was my role model. And after I had been in Central America for 10 years in Honduras. I worked as a nurse, missionary nurse down there. And I did treat a couple people with Parkinson's during my time. I was on the island of Roatan, if any of you dived. And we had a couple people in the community on the island with Parkinson's. And I medicated them, and if they were too sluggish, their family told me, then we'd up their Cinemet. And I mean, I was a little clueless, but I was all they had. So we took care of folks. But I had come back from Honduras after 10 years with in a wheelchair, because I have rheumatoid arthritis. So you can see it, diabetes, rheumatoid arthritis, a non-functioning thyroid from Graves. What are all those called? There you go. Good job. And they're loaded in my family. So the Parkinson's, though, is out of the blue. We have nobody in the family that has it. I know they talk about genetic things now, but they weren't back then. So my arthritis was getting better. I got up and started moving around. I started taking all those big guns TNF inhibitors, and they really worked for me. And so I came back to the Northwest, and I knew I couldn't live on the coast because it was too damp, so I came to Spokane. And I was just here a few weeks and started going to a workshop, and I met Sarah Nielsen, who is a speech therapist. And she said, you were in Phoenix. Did you ever hear of a singing group for people with Parkinson's called the Tremble Clefs? Isn't that a great time? I wish we'd have thought of that name. Anyway, and I said, I've heard of them. I was going to start singing with them because singing is really the best way to keep your volume and keep your voice and articulation. And so with Sarah, we started a group here. We started with about 4 people, and we're up to about 35. And the speech students over in the next building, we have 2 of them that come, and they work with us all the time. So we rotate students. It's great to have them, but we have people who say that their kids will call from across the country on Tuesday nights, because they know they'll be able to understand them better because they've been singing that day. So it really makes a huge difference. But as a hospice chaplain, I do music therapy, and so I sing a lot anyway, and I think that's why I've been able to keep my volume. Before I started taking Cinemet, I was losing it. I was quiet. I was telling Ian that I was complaining to my mother that I went through the McDonald's drive-in and they couldn't hear me. And she said, ever sympathetic, my mother, well, honey, you shouldn't be going to McDonald's anyway. So there's the day-to-day, I just want to talk to you about a couple things, the day-to-day, I don't call them struggles. I mean, the whole world has struggles. Everybody has something. And actually, there's a lot worse things you could have. Parkinson's, I think I'm one of those people, when you get it young, they tell you that you have less of a chance of getting dementia. I don't know if that's still true, but I'm still clinging to that belief, because there's got to be some advantage of starting at 45. Anyway, one of the things that I struggle with on a daily basis is fatigue. I'm in a women with Parkinsons support group. There's about 30 of us. 2 of us work full-time. I have this personal bias, and it's a personal decision, but I think sometimes because you can get on disability pretty easily with Parkinson's when you're young, the doctors keep saying, you know, you need to apply, it takes a long time, and I'm not going there. I think sometimes people do earlier than they need to. I think if you can adapt and do things with your work. Now, I'm not an RN anymore, I'm a chaplain, and so, but I still, on a typical day, will go to 5 homes, which is busy and a lot of work, but it's still good, and I love it. It's very fulfilling work. I have to be careful because as a chaplain, I pray with people, and I've learned to, sometimes you put people in a circle, family around the bed, and the person is actively dying, and so you say a prayer, and I've learned to not hold hands this way, because invariably when I'm down here I shake, and it's distracting. So I'm resting hands on the bed now. We pray sitting down. But there's little adjustments you make. I struggle with fatigue, and which gets no sympathy from anybody, because everybody's tired, everybody's worn out. But I remember learning that with Parkinson's, you lose your automatic pilot. And so you find that you have to think about everything. You just go out here and you walk, and I walked across the parking lot and got here. But when I come to a curb, I have to tell myself to pick up my left foot, because if I don't, it doesn't pick up enough. We did a physical thing, testing thing Saturday, and we had a Wii, and a Wii, W-I-I, and I was doing the skiing thing, and I actually did better than one of the students. But what I found was I couldn't lift up off that left side. And so my whole left side is a little problematic. But I've decided that what the best thing to do is exercise. And so in our women's support group, we push each other to exercise. And almost every woman there is doing something. And I'm in the pool. I tried just regular swimming, but I have to tell my leg to kick every kick, and that's really boring. And so actually I have the most ineffective kick. I had a teacher who was working with me, a swim teacher, and she was saying, you know, you're kicking, but you're just not going anywhere. I said, I know, it's a pretty ineffective. And so I'm coining this term, so if you use it, you're going to get in trouble. It's called hydrostriding. You've heard of agua jogging, but hydrostriding is in water up to here, and you walk big, long strides in the water. And I have improved my balance so dramatically in the last 2 years. I was falling. I cracked my knee. I have arthritis, so I can't afford to fall and break a hip. But if you have people who need exercise, and you know, you got to get past how you look like in a swimming suit. Nobody cares. You're in a pool. You're not there at the beach. It's not like you're down on spring break in Mexico. You are just there to exercise, and it's great fun. And there's a lot of people working out. And it doesn't have to be warm water. If you get your butt moving, the water warms up in about 5 minutes. You know, you can whine getting in. It's so cold, but if you keep going and keep moving, then it warms up fast. So I love to swim. I love to stay busy. And the other thing is I talk about Parkinson's, because we have a real sense, a lot of us who have this belief, we have an obligation to teach and to instruct people. I was telling someone about a checker where I go to Rosar's, and she has Parkinson's. I knew she did and pushed her. She finally went to a doctor and got diagnosed, but she was one of those people that doesn't like medicine. She wasn't going to take medicine, and she was slowing down and slowing down. I can tell you this because she's very upfront about it. She tells everybody. And she was getting so slow, I would hear people say, oh, don't go through her line. She's really slow. She has Parkinson's. And she, I mean, it was counting out the change. It was just painstaking to watch her. 1, 2. And I said, you are going to lose your job if you don't start taking that medicine. And you know what her fear was? She says, I don't want to look like Michael J. Fox. And I said, I've been on this for 10 years. I said, I don't look like him. There's a whole lot of extenuating circumstances. If you read his books, you'll find he took a lot of street drugs first. He took a lot of medicine because he hid it for 7 years. There's reasons why. And also, he looks bad intentionally. He lets his dyskinesia go crazy when he's on television because he's an actor. I mean, this is what he does. But when you see him normally, he looks fine. He's fine. And he's a little twitchy, like some of us are certain times of the day. But she finally started taking the medicine, and I saw her a few weeks later, and I said, you started, I can tell. And she says, you're right, and you were right. I should have started this long time ago. So we who have Parkinson's get so we can notice people. Do you notice? You can look at people and say, And we work hard at not sidling up to them and saying, you have Parkinson's, do you know that? That would be very disconcerting. But there are people that you can work with, and people start coming to you when they know you have this, and they start asking you, what do you think? Just to teach you a little bit, in a benign essential tremor, which is what I thought I had, you're usually both sides. Parkinson's usually starts on just one side. And little old ladies that have their tea, they'll hold their teacups, have you seen this? And they're shaking, and the tea is slopping all over, and they get it back down. And with Parkinson's, when you pick up the coffee cup, your tremor stops, basically. So there's the little things. You can also do checking for cogwheel, I call it ratcheting up. I remember my doctor put his hand here and he said, now pull up on my hand. And so I went up and I, of course, ratcheted all the way up. And that's something that's indicative of Parkinson's. But my friends told me when I found out diagnosed, they said, you know, we kind of wonder because you sort of walk like you have a stroke. And I realized that was my orangutan arm, which wasn't moving. And so now, you know, you kind of make yourself move it, and the medicine helped get rid of that and made me move it. Let me see, fatigue, exercise. Diet is important. My protein intake doesn't seem to affect my Cinemet. It makes me really sick to my stomach, so I always take it with meals. I'm still on a decently low dose, so I don't worry about that right now, and Steve tells me not to worry about it because it works, obviously. I don't have a lot of freezing. I was at Powell's bookstore in Portland. How many of you have been to Powell's? Great place. Oh, I could spend hours there. Anyway, they have these big wooden stairs, and I was going down the stairs a few months ago, stupidly, not by the handrail. And I started going down the stairs, and I realized that I froze for the first time. And all these people were coming along behind me, and I was ready to go head over tea kettle or whatever they say. And that was a scary thing. And so ever since then, I make sure I buy a handrail. I don't use stairs unless my hands are pretty empty, because you need that balance. Anyway, that's it. It's great. It's a good life. It's not a bad disease to have right now. I realize that I can go along doing well for 30 years, and then wham. But I'm convinced that by that time they'll have something better to fix this. I'm counting on it and praying for that. But I did write some lyrics to a little song. So I always have to sing this song, and poor Richard was telling me he's heard it so many times, he actually knows it. But anyway, it's to When Irish Eyes Are Smiling, and I was always grateful that we refer to this as our PD, because to try and rhyme something with Parkinson's disease would be impossible. It goes like this. Your hands begin to tremble, and your feet, that's too high. Your hands begin to tremble, and your feet stick to the floor. Your face forgets to smile, folks can't hear you anymore. Don't let these things upset you. Battle on and you will see that each day contains a blessing. Life can still be great with PD.